Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be breaking down 3 super viable skill builds to use for Year 6 Season 3. One of which is an absolute must-have in my opinion, even if you're not really into skill builds like me. And I know many of you are probably thinking, skill builds? Prajna, are you okay? I know, I rarely run skill builds, but hear me out. Because skill builds can be extremely viable if you set one up the right way, and considering the new seasonal modifiers, many of which seems to now cater to skill builds, it's just the perfect time to set up some very powerful skill builds. So you should find these skill builds super effective with the new seasonal modifiers, and although you can solo legendary difficulty strongholds with any of these builds, there's one in particular that makes running higher difficulty content so much easier. And this build that I'm referring to is a raw skill damage build. Like, look at how viable it is at taking down these heavily armored chungas. In my opinion, I feel like this is a must-have build for anyone's loadout. It's just amazing how effective it is at clearing higher difficulty content, and even though the survivability is quite low, you will be safe in cover for the most part. And honestly, you don't even have to fire your weapon, as the striker drone and assault turret will essentially be dealing out most of the damage. So this is a really great build to use for clearing open world activities, especially if you want to add more directives when XP farming, like pistolero for example. So level 4 heroic control points, bounties, public executions, and all that wonderful jazz will be a lot easier to complete with these setups. And even if you don't have all the pieces to set these builds up, hopefully they can at least give you an idea or perhaps inspire you to make a setup of your own that matches your preferred playstyle. So guys, without further ado, let's get started. So this first build is actually one of my personal favorites. I made a video on this build in the past, but this is a much more improved version and will deal out way more skill damage, especially with the help of some of the seasonal modifiers. The striker drone and assault turret absolutely wreck with this setup, and to be honest, you rarely have to fire your weapon, only to get the skill damage buff though. And secondly, the capacitor will actually increase your skill damage up to 60% while providing a weapon damage increase, all thanks to its talent capacitance. So this is a very viable PVE build that's great for farming the summit, or any of the open world activities such as control points and public executions, especially XP farming. And what's great about this build is since you won't really need to fire your weapon as often, it allows you to add more directives for more XP gains, such as ammo hoarders and pistolero. So for the primary weapon, the capacitor is the ideal weapon for this build. This gun has an extremely high base damage and comes with the talent capacitance. So basically, shooting enemies builds stacks that cap at 40. Each stack grants 1.5% skill damage. However, after 5 seconds, stacks will decay by 1 stack per second. The other great thing about this talent is that it will provide you with 7.5% increased weapon damage for each skill you have. So since this build has 6 skill tiers, I'll be getting about 45% increased weapon damage, so that's nice as well. And for the secondary weapon, the test subject is a great alternative if you don't have the capacitor. So this is a named weapon, and it comes with the talent Perfectly in Sync, which grants 20% skill damage for 5 seconds upon hitting an enemy. Not only that, but by using a non-shield skill or by damaging an enemy with a skill, you get an increased 20% weapon damage for 5 seconds as well. And damage increases are doubled while both buffs are active at the same time. So this is a great alternative to the capacitor since it's a bit similar. Now, if you're wondering how you can farm for the capacitor, it's actually quite easy. You can get it as a guaranteed reward by completing 5 challenges in the summit. Now, if you don't have either of these weapons, there is another named weapon that comes with the talent Perfectly in Sync, and that's the named Harmony Rifle. So if you have this weapon, I recommend using it in the meantime until you get the capacitor. Now, this is a rifle, but since most of the damage will be coming from the skills, it won't really matter. As long as you're able to activate the Perfectly in Sync talent to get those buffs, you should be good to go. Now, worst case scenario, let's say you don't have any of these weapons. Not a problem. Craft any weapon of your choice and simply roll the regular in sync talent on it, considering you have that talent saved in your library for the weapon category of your choice. Now for the mask, an Empress International mask, and since I have 3 pieces, I get 10% skill health and damage and 8% skill efficiency, rolled with a skill tier core, skill haste and damage, and a skill haste mod. For the vest, another piece of Empress International with a skill tier core, status effect, and skill damage, and a skill haste mod. But it will be ideal, however, to have skill haste rolled here instead of status effect because this is a skill damage focused build, right? And for the talent, I decided to go with Kinetic Momentum for the skill damage increase. However, Glass Cannon is another option, but it comes with a harsh downside. But Kinetic Momentum is a great talent for skill builds because when you're in combat, each skill will generate a stack while active or not on cooldown. And each stack will increase your skill damage by 1.5% and your total skill repair by 2%. This stacks up to 15 times. However, stacks are lost when the skill is on cooldown. Now, for the holster, the Waveform exotic holster actually synergizes very well with the Kinetic Momentum talent. So with the alternating current talent, you will generate a stack of 3% skill damage on one of your skills every second, capping at 10 stacks. Then, after 10 seconds at the cap, the stacks will transfer to your other skill, and this process repeats over and over. So this piece also always comes with a skill tier core attribute with skill damage and skill haste. But for anyone who doesn't have this holster, I'll show you a great alternative in just a moment. But for the knee pads, a Hana-U piece for the 10% skill haste bonus, a skill tier core, and both skill haste and skill damage attributes. And for the gloves, one piece of Wyvern wear for the 8% skill damage bonus, with skill tier core and both skill haste and skill damage attributes. Last but not least, for the backpack, the third piece of the Empress International brand set with a skill tier core, both skill haste and damage attributes, and a skill haste mod. And for the backpack talent, I chose to go with the tech support talent, which gives you 25% skill damage for 25 seconds for getting a skill kill. This doesn't stack, but each kill will refresh that 25-second timer. Now, a good alternative for this Waveform holster would be another Hana-U piece. So with 2 pieces of Hana, you will get an extra 10% skill damage. But this holster should be in the general loot pool, so you should be able to farm it like any other piece of gear. So Countdown with holsters set as your targeted loot may be your best bet. Now for the seasonal modifiers, I'm currently using the Overdrive Active modifier, which basically instantly maxes out your rogue momentum meter, ultimately providing 30% weapon damage, skill damage, and rate of fire. And for the passive modifiers, I'm using the aggressive drone, which increases the striker drone's damage by 50%. However, it basically cuts the duration in half by 40%. Which isn't a problem because this build has a decent amount of skill haste. And for the second passive modifier, Momentum Surge will double momentum gain with skill kills. So this kind of counteracts the downside of the Overdrive Active modifier in a sense, right? Because if you've noticed, after Overdrive ends, momentum gains are reduced by 70% for like 2.5 minutes. And for the third passive modifier, Critical Momentum. So critical hits have a 40% chance to grant 1% momentum. And for the skills, you want the Striker Drone and Assault Turret. And for the weapon specialization, I went with Technician for the 10% bonus skill damage. Okie dokie, this second build is very similar to the previous setup. However, this setup has healing capabilities. This build takes advantage of the Return to Sender talent on the new Refactor gear set. And this gear set basically heals you based on the percentage of damage dealt by your skills. So this is nice because it's almost like you have a personal healer, so to speak, right? For this build, I'm also running the Ninjabike exotic backpack. The Ninjabike bag really helps to squeeze in some extra stat bonuses. And although this build has slightly less skill damage, the damage is still fairly decent, with an increased survivability. I'm also using the capacitor for this setup since it helps by providing skill damage and overall weapon damage. This is also another great setup for clearing higher difficulty content since it not only has decent damage, but great heals as well. So if you're up for it, you can use this build in a legendary mission. So for the mask, a Refactor mask with a skill tier core and skill damage attribute with a skill haste mod. And as with any other gear set, you get the 2 and 3 piece bonus. So with the Refactor set, I get 15% status effect for 2 pieces, and 3 pieces will grant an additional 25% skill damage, which is super helpful because the more skill damage we can stack on this build, the more healing you get back from this set. So with the 4-piece bonus, you unlock the talent Return to Sender. So with this talent active, you will receive armor repairs of 10% of the damage dealt by your skills, and your allies will receive up to 20%. However, having the vest equipped will increase this effect because the vest comes with the talent Increased Interest, and this talent basically increases the heals you get from 10 to 25%, while also increasing ally heals from 20 to 35%. And for the core attribute, skill tier with skill damage and a skill haste mod. For the holster, a Hana-U piece for the 10% increased skill haste. And since I have the Ninjabike exotic bag, I actually get the second piece bonus, so a 10% skill damage increase as well, with skill tier and both skill haste and damage attributes. And for the knee pads, a third piece of Refactor with armor core and skill damage. For the gloves, an Empress International piece for the 10% skill health, and again, since I have the Ninjabike bag, I get the second piece bonus that gives an extra 10% skill damage. Now for the backpack, the Ninjabike bag, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but for those who don't know, this bag basically acts as a slot holder to fulfill a gear or brand set bonus requirement. So basically, having this backpack will act as my fourth Refactor piece, and both my second piece of Hana-U and Empress International. So this backpack is amazing, and it's great for putting together some very viable hybrid builds. Now, this build actually has a decent amount of weapon damage as well, because remember, the capacitor's weapon talent gives a 7.5% weapon damage increase per skill tier, plus this weapon already has a very high base damage. So since this build has 6 skill tiers, that's about 45% increased weapon damage right off the bat, right? And for the skills, the same as the previous build, Striker Drone and Assault Turret. And for the seasonal modifiers, Overdrive for the active and for the passive aggressive drone, Momentum Surge, and the critical momentum modifiers. Also, feel free to use whichever modifiers you prefer because these are just my preferences. Now for the weapon specialization, Technician for the extra skill tier and 10% increased skill damage. Alrighty, so now I'm going to show you a third setup, and this is a Refactor build as well, very similar to the previous. In fact, the only difference is that for this setup, I'm actually running the named Hana-U backpack that comes with a talent that grants 30% skill damage instead of the Ninjabike bag. So this is the named Hana-U bag, and it's called Force Multiplier. This backpack comes with the talent Perfect Combined Arms, which grants a nice 30% extra skill damage just by shooting an enemy. However, it only lasts for 3 seconds, but it will refresh with every shot you land regardless of what weapon you're using and has no cooldown. So this variation is actually slightly stronger than the previous one, and it's actually much better for team play. So if you don't have the Ninjabike bag, then you can set this version up. And to be honest, this is probably going to be my preferred version moving on for the remainder of this season because of how much skill damage you get from this Perfect Combined Arms talent. So for the gloves, another Hana-U piece for the extra 10% skill damage bonus. And for the backpack and gloves, ideally, for the attributes, it would be best to have skill damage and skill haste. Also, since gear set pieces only have 1 attribute slot, having skill damage on all your Refactor pieces would be highly beneficial. And just in case anyone's wondering how to get this named Hana-U bag, it's actually being sold at the Countdown vendor right outside the base of operations. So here's your chance to grab one before the vendor resets. Just reroll hazard protection for skill haste and you're set. But if the vendor resets by the time you view this video, then you can see if you get lucky with buying some named caches. But honestly, Countdown might be your best bet though. Just set Hana-U as your targeted loot and try your luck in Countdown. I actually managed to get one to drop for me during this Countdown run, and it only took 1 run, but it dropped with repair skills. So again, give Countdown a try if you need this piece. But if the RNG just isn't having it with you, and you can't get it to drop for you in Countdown, then just use your Countdown requisition credits to stock up on named caches. This will increase your chances because you're limiting it to just named items, right? So now, as far as the global modifiers, the same as the previous builds. So I'm running Overdrive, which honestly is optional. So if you like any of the other 2, then feel free to go with either of these instead. The Tactical Supremacy modifier is also very viable. I haven't unlocked it yet though, but anyway, for the passives, the aggressive drone, momentum surge, and critical momentum. And that will do it for today's video, guys. I really hope these builds help out and works wonders for you, or at least they gave you an idea for your own setup. This is Prajna, and if you made it to the end of the video, you are a gem. Life can be challenging, so it's always great to hear this, right? Anyway, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them for me in the comment section. Good luck farming, and don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it. Keep it cool, keep it classy, and see you in the next video. Peace out.